We're going to talk today about one of the most important nutrients that has been studied over the last 200 years, and its impact not only on sport performance and athletic performance, but also on health. And so creatine is not something new. It's actually been studied since the early mid-1800s when Chevreul from France determined its impact and discovered it in muscle. And there was actually a supplement in the mid-1800s, was a meat extract that we believe contained a large amount of creatine. And it was sold as a supplement to build muscle and strength in elite bodybuilders and strength power athletes and people that did feats of strength. And this actually was an advertisement from the 1800s on this creatine supplementation. And so this then was an important compound that was monitored in the 1800s, but the first study done on creatine was in 1909 at the University of Yale University. And what they found was that if they fed dogs creatine, they gained weight and they were able to do more work. And that was the first study suggesting some potential benefit. And over the next 50 years, most of the research on creatine was simply measuring, does creatine get excreted from the body or not? And they noticed that there were some health populations that excreted more creatine or had lower creatine levels than others throughout history. It wasn't until the muscle biopsy was developed in the 1960s by Johann Bergstrom and Eric Holtman that started measuring the changes with exercise on ATP, phosphocreatine, anaerobic type responses to exercise. And these studies led to use of creatine in medical populations. In the 1970s, creatine was used for gyrate atrophy patients. These people have no ability to produce creatine and they become blind as they age. And so they started providing creatine over time and they improved their vision or didn't have as much decay. And then there was a seminal paper in 1992 by Roger Harris, the late Roger Harris. We were just at Cambridge University last few days ago giving a symposium in honor of Dr. Harris and pointed to this paper as the beginning of recent creatine research and interest because they measured different amounts of creatine in the blood as well as muscle, determined how much to take, et cetera. And this was then picked up by myself and other researchers in the United States to look at how creatine affects training and performance and recovery. And then more recently, there's been an interest in the health benefits of creatine supplementation. So if you look at all the studies that have been done on creatine, quite a few over time, thousands of papers have been done on creatine, mainly as a metabolite, then on performance in sports, and now on the metabolic role in health and disease. And a paper that Diego here led and authored really talked about the metabolic basis for creatine in health and disease, because what we thought was once a sports supplement has now been used for lots of medical populations and lots of groups that may have benefit from increasing creatine stores for fighting the disease. And so where does creatine? Creatine comes from 3 amino acids, glycine, arginine, and ornithine, and it is then synthesized into GAA, guanidinoacetic acid. And there's a lot of interest now in GAA as a precursor to creatine to improve brain creatine levels, we'll talk about. And then there are also some enzymes that in some populations, there are deficiencies. And when you have deficiency in some of these enzymes, you can't produce creatine on your own. And this then causes maturation development, poor cognitive function, poor motor development over time. Welcome. And so we can produce about half of the daily need per day from the synthesis. You have to get the rest of the creatine from your diet. And the best sources of creatine are meat, fish, And about 1 kilo of fish containing salmon, those type of things, contain about 4 grams of creatine. And so if you have a normal meal, you might get a half a gram of creatine, a gram of creatine with a normal serving of meat, red meat, or fish. People who are vegetarians have lower creatine in their muscle and brain. And therefore, if you have a diet where you increase availability of creatine, you can get more to a normal level in blue. This is like a gas tank that's 70% full. And by adding extra creatine to the diet, you can fill that gas tank up to maximum and therefore have more energy for sprinting, recovery, and fighting metabolic challenges. So here's a diagram of what happens when you consume 5 grams of creatine in the blue. And if you consume, it takes about an hour to get your creatine levels up, and then it starts going down. This was the basis for determining how much creatine and how often you need to take it to load the muscle up. In the middle diagram is a normal serving of meat. So it takes a little bit of increase, it takes longer to go. So creatine supplementation is actually a better way to increase creatine stores in the body rather than just diet. Low pH or high pH prevents the conversion of creatine to creatinine. And therefore, when you consume oral creatine monohydrate and get it into the stomach, it protects it. So 99% of all creatine consumed is either stored in muscle and other tissues or excreted in the urine. We typically will tell individuals if you want to increase your creatine stores rapidly, you load with creatine, and that is typically 4 times a day of 5 grams, or about 0.03 grams per kg. And in a week, 7 days, you will now increase those creatine stores to maximum, about 100%. You can also use creatine with small amounts, 3 grams a day or so. Over time, 3, 4, 5 weeks or so, it will eventually get your creatine stores up to maximum in the muscle. For general health, we recommend at least 2 to 3 grams of creatine per day. I'm going to show you data showing that people who have higher creatine in their diet have much less risk to certain types of diseases and health conditions. And so we actually are recommending older individuals consume a little bit more than this, more like 10 grams of creatine per day, and I'll explain that in a minute. So the idea of supplementation is if you're normal vegetarian, you will be in red, 60, 70% full. If you have a normal meat-eating diet that has fish and red meat, you'll be in the lighter blue. If you creatine load 4 grams, 4 times a day, 5 grams per time, 20 grams a day, you'll be in the light green. And if you take creatine with carbohydrate or carbohydrate and protein, you actually can get a greater increase in creatine. Okay. And so our goal is to maximize creatine in cell so you have this energy available for explosive exercise as well as to handle challenging, stressful situations in the cell. So the best source of creatine, dietary creatine, is creatine monohydrate. 95% of all studies done on creatine have been done on creatine monohydrate. And the best source is the creatine from Germany, which is called Creapure. And many studies have looked at these efficacies, and the only one that's approved by all countries for sale and has been approved with even some health claims in Europe is creatine monohydrate. So in 2007 and 2017, we did position stands on creatine for the International Journal of Sports Nutrition, the Journal of International Society of Sport Nutrition. And we concluded that creatine was, at that time, the most effective nutritional ergogenic aid for high-intensity power athletes. So if you have athletes doing intensive sprints, recovery, needing to build muscle, and they're not taking creatine, they're behind scientifically. They need to be taking creatine or adding creatine to their diet. Next, we also have now a lot of studies showing safety. We just published a paper last spring on looking at 685 studies on creatine supplementation. And we looked at all the types of side effects reported and found that the amount of side effects in creatine users was no different than those taking the placebos. And therefore, there was no association with any injury or any anecdotally reported side effect. So it's safe. There's actually been studies up to 30 grams per day for years in clinical populations. We also know it's safe for kids. We now suggest creatine in younger individuals. I'll explain why in a minute. And we also think you're fine taking creatine if you're less than 18, as long as you take it responsibly. And this is the most studied creatine nutritional supplement out there. And so this seems to be something effective and helpful, and clinical populations can benefit. And that's what I want to spend some time talking about today. So a few years ago, we looked at the literature and had a creatine conference in 2022. We looked at creatine for health, because we know there's effects for performance. We know that there's improvement in strength and power and muscle mass when you take creatine and lift weights, for example. What we're expanding our understanding is on the role of creatine in different metabolic diseases. And so we did a paper on creatine supplementation and overviewed the literature from cancer to aging to pregnancy on, basically from pregnancy, third trimester, all the way through aging individuals, and then looked at what clinical population research was out there. And I'll draw your attention to the bottom. It says creatine for health.com. This is a great resource for finding newest articles on creatine supplementation, videos of individuals presenting about creatine, and all the specifics. So please take a look at that. And this came out in the conference and a book that was then just published on this topic. So what we now know is creatine's important throughout the lifespan, not just for athletes. And we have to get the word out that it's for health. It's for grandmothers and grandfathers as much as it is for younger athletes. Let's take a look at the spectrum. We now know that mothers during the third trimester, the baby actually takes more creatine out of the blood of the mother. And there's a greater dietary need for creatine in third trimester of pregnancy. In animal studies, we know that if they feed animals creatine and then cause asphyxia, lack of oxygen during the childbirth, that the survival rate of the animal is much greater, 50% greater than if they had a normal diet because of this greater creatine. We think the creatine helps with neural development and for the cell to handle ischemia conditions, lack of oxygen conditions. So we're now using creatine in third trimester pregnancy, creatine loading before natural childbirth. What? If you creatine load, more creatine in the muscle, natural childbirth is muscle contraction, relaxation, muscle contraction, relaxation. And so it gives the mother more stamina. So it protects the baby and helps the mother. So there are lots of research studies now being done in Australia under Stacey Ellery's group that's looking at how giving creatine during pregnancy, after birth, and even through the first few years of life affects neural development, cognitive development, and motor skill development in children. What else? We used to think, well, we just should give creatine for older folks or adults. We now know there's a lot of studies in children that have benefited from creatine supplementation, particularly if they have a neuromuscular disease like muscular dystrophy. We also know that kids who have lower creatine in their diet don't grow as fast. They're shorter. They have more body fat. They have less muscle. And we'll show you some of the data in a minute. And then when you look at performance and training in adults, here are all the types of performances and strength training and sport performance and sport athletic conditions where creatine has been beneficial. So it used to be thought to be just something for weightlifters. Now we know it has application for all athletes, from endurance all the way down to high intensity explosive activity. What else? There's a lot of research now on women's health and creatine. If you go through and look at the diagram, creatine needs in women change during the menstrual cycle. And so there are studies now looking at how provision of creatine before the period and after the period may help manage symptoms of PMS and also help with availability of energy during those pre and post period of time. And we also know that women typically, because they have less muscle mass, they typically have lower creatine levels. And a lot of times women typically don't eat as much meat and fish in their diet and therefore have a little bit lower creatine. So there seems to be some sex-specific adaptations due to creatine supplementation that's been explored outside of pregnancy. What else? Probably the most important applications is elder. As you age, we lose muscle mass. As we age, we lose strength. We get susceptible for falls. If we break our hip as we're older, our prognosis for life is very low. So finding nutritional and exercise strategies to keep strong, healthy muscle is important. But there's been now studies in elderly with exercise that they can maintain and build muscle mass. They can help slow down the loss of bone. They improve their strength, and therefore they are able to perform better. The diagram at the bottom left, adipose tissue, we just got done doing a study where we went 10 grams per day for 12 weeks in individuals average age about 68. So 45 to 75 years of age, average about 68. And we found there was a greater percent body fat loss during retraining on a diet when taking creatine compared to placebo. And so this may be a way to not only build muscle, actually promote a more optimal body composition in elder. We also looked at cognitive function and showed some benefit in elder. So for aging individuals, creatine is becoming very popular and very effective. If you've got a father, a mother, a grandparent, and they're not taking creatine at least 3 grams a day, they need to be taking creatine 3 grams a day, okay? Brain health. There's a lot of research now that creatine in the brain affects your ability to think. There are studies in sleep deprivation where they stay up for 36 hours and then have them perform cognitive skills, like a pilot or something that has to fly overnight. And those individuals who creatine load before they have that sleep deprivation are able to handle that deprivation better and have better psychomotor performance at the end of the 36-hour period of sleep deprivation. There's also studies showing that you can increase the brain creatine content. And that increased energy and phosphocreatine in the brain is important for thinking, particularly when you're tired and fatigued, or if there's ischemia, lack of oxygen supply, like a stroke. And so there have been lots of studies in animals where they feed the animals creatine, and then they cause a concussion. They cause stroke or cause spinal cord injury. And what they found is those animals fed with creatine have about 30 to 50% less damage because they have energy available in the brain to handle the problem. So there's a lot of interest now in the cognition effects. We think you need to take more like 10 grams per day, but this seems to have some benefits over time. So there's a lot of interest in concussion, TBI, and other things. There's also data in heart patients. Well, this is just for muscle. No, your heart, when you have ischemic heart disease, you have lack of oxygen to your cell. And by having extra phosphocreatine in the heart, you actually can have it protect the ischemia and reduce the size of the myocardial infarction. They are doing studies where they're feeding individuals creatine before they have heart surgery that might cause a stroke or a heart attack, and the damage is much less if that occurs when they're creatine loaded, both in animals and humans. So there's a lot of potential. There's even a few studies showing that creatine supplementation lowers blood lipids in some instances. Vascular health. Well, the vascular tissue is muscle, smooth muscle cell. And there's data now showing that if you provide creatine, you have better compliance of the vascular system and therefore can handle hypertensive and hypotensive situations better. Seems to help with nitric oxide availability. What about disease? We have a few diseases that appear to have benefit from creatine supplementation as adjunctive therapy. First are the creatine synthesis deficiencies. There are three major deficiencies, and two of them are happening in children they have throughout the lifespan. Two of them, high-dose creatine supplementation helps reduce the problem. So if you're born with these errors of creatine synthesis genetic problem, you basically can't synthesize creatine on your own. You're dependent on the diet to get your creatine. And in this case, if you don't do that, if you don't provide more creatine in the diet, they have slower maturation, they have poor cognitive development, they have more mental development issues and physical function development issues. And it's almost like the autism spectrum. In fact, there's interest now in creatine and autism, in part because they've noticed this availability of creatine can improve these psychomotor function effects. And so there's treatment for that. There are a lot of mitochondrial dystrophies or dysfunction conditions. And if my mitochondria cannot produce energy effectively from oxidative metabolism, I'm then more dependent on non-oxidative pathways to provide the energy. So when cells are under stress or under certain conditions, this then affects their ability to produce energy. And we found that providing creatine and creatine loading seems to help the cell during those stressful conditions manage energy availability better, whether it's a heart attack or traumatic brain injury or other mitochondrial dystrophies that often accompany aging. This seems to have some benefit, and it's an area of major research. What about rehab? If you do physical therapy and have a musculoskeletal injury, your muscle atrophies. And if I can slow that atrophy down or precondition before my knee surgery and get my knee as strong and big as possible, my muscle, I can have less loss or start out higher, not as much disability from that loss. What we're doing now is providing creatine after injury to try to increase muscle strength and availability. And there are some studies showing that if you put your arm in a cast, for example, and you watch the atrophy rates, those who have had creatine during that injury don't lose as much muscle mass, they don't lose as much strength, and they're able to rehabilitate faster compared to those who don't. So there's a whole host of type of rehabilitative areas that seem to be effective, from recovery from exercise to spinal cord injury. They're giving creatine to spinal cord patients in their therapy to help with neuromuscular function. Arthritis, muscular dystrophy, and a few others. What else? There are some studies showing that if you have individuals who have diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and you put them in an exercise program that includes resistance training, they get better effects on glucose management if they take creatine during their training. So this is one way to have an influence on glucose uptake and insulin sensitivity more than just training. There are now some studies on the immune system that show that the immune cell not only needs glutamine and other carbohydrates and things, but really is dependent on the availability of creatine. And when there's lack of creatine to the immune cell, it has dysfunction. It doesn't function well. But when you provide creatine to the immune cell, it can fight infections to a greater degree. And so there's a lot of interest now in this, particularly in T cell function. Some of the most fascinating data on creatine right now is in the area of cancer. There are some tumors where lack of creatine affects energy metabolism that cause a promotion in the cancer. The tumor grows. And they're finding that if they provide creatine to normalize cellular metabolism, they can slow down the growth of that tumor. So there's a lot of fascinating research, not only on tumor effects, but then also in cancer patients. Cancer patients on chemotherapy typically lose muscle, they lose strength, and therefore by providing creatine, they can have better muscle function. And so one of my former doctoral students now has her second NIH grant to look at creatine in breast cancer survival. Very interesting results. Last one or two I'll mention. When you digest foods and you have nutrient absorption, that is dependent on creatine. And there are studies now showing if you have irritable bowel syndrome or digestive disorders, by providing creatine improves the energy capability in digestion and helps normalize some of the side effects of these type of disorders. So even the nutrient absorption can be affected by creatine. What else? Some fascinating data on depression. People who take or have higher creatine in the diet have less depression, and people who are on antidepressant medications who are non-responsive to those medications, they give them creatine, it increases energy in the brain, and they now are more responsive to the medication. So, okay. In patients who have suicidal thoughts in which their medication is not working, the improvement is about a 50% reduction in suicidal thoughts, just by simply improving energy availability in the brain. So a lot of research now on that. And then another one, have you heard of long COVID, post-COVID, viral disease, chronic fatigue? There are now studies showing that if you give creatine to patients who have long COVID symptoms, that it reduces their symptomology. They're able to perform better. They're able to get back to training. They don't have as much psychological depression. And so far, there are a couple of studies showing this positive effect of creatine in long COVID. All right, so that's a lot. What's the overall impact? Fascinating data now coming out where they've looked at the creatine in the diets in NHANES database. That's that large database of health and monitored for decades in the United States. And they're going back into these data sets and looking at people with low creatine or high creatine diets and whether that affected disease. Well, here's a few. If you are a child 2 to 19 and your creatine intake is low, you're not as tall, you have more body fat, and you have less muscle mass. Maybe we should be giving our kids some creatine snacks versus fruit juice drinks, okay? What else? They then did the body composition. The kids that had higher creatine in the diet had lower body fat, more muscle mass. Makes sense. What else? Studies have shown that higher creatine intake, and these are large studies, associated with lower risk of menstrual cycle problems and irregularities in women who are going through. We saw that it affects the menstrual cycle in research. Now here's the epidemiological data showing that this can actually affect symptomology in women and make their periods more normal, less obstetric conditions, less problems in their pelvis, et cetera. And these are in adult women of childbearing years. What else? There's a lot of studies showing if you have higher than a gram per day of creatine, it can protect against a lot of deleterious aging effects, loss of muscle, other things, okay? What else? Low creatine intake associated with increased risk of heart and liver conditions. So if I provide creatine in the diet throughout the lifespan, much better reduction in risk for those things. There's also studies showing that if you take higher creatine, does not affect the kidneys. There's no effect. There's studies showing that if you are ages 12 and over, that it has less impact on liver damage and disease. Higher creatine diets are protective. Another study shows that as you age, people who have higher creatine in their diet have less neurofilament damage, which is directly related to cognitive decline. What else? There's even studies showing that if you take creatine, it has a general health benefit. And then the problem is that as we're going through, even though we talk about creatine, the creatine in the diet's not sufficient for most adults. And especially in younger individuals don't seem to have as much creatine in their diet. Women, there's evidence to show that pregnant women have better outcomes if they have a little bit higher creatine in their diet. And they also need more creatine because they don't get enough. What else? A huge study on changes, dietary creatine among younger is usually going down. We're eating too much junk food. We need to eat some quality meats and fish. And then the latest is from Osijek's group that NHANES database shows that high creatine diets reduce the incidence or mortality. They actually add years to your lifespan if you have more creatine in the diet. Wow. So a couple of papers show that. So where are we at? We know for athletes, creatine's important. What we've got to do is got to get the information out to pregnant women and to mothers and families who realize kids need to have a little creatine in their diet, and adolescents and college age individuals who are active. Middle-aged folks have less effects by having creatine in their diet. And as you get older, it's probably more important to have creatine. And so one of the things we've been doing is trying to get the word out through Creatine for Health effort that Diego and others have been involved in, and Roberto, and we're trying to get the public information out there. And so we have now a website, creatineforhealth.com, all the presentations, the latest data, latest science, blogs and videos are all about. The papers are there, the blogs are there, the Instagram and the Facebook social media contact is there, so we get the word out. And then all these great presentations now have been recorded over time, so you can find out, well, what about creatine and cancer? We got a whole lecture right there for you. And in the short period we've done this, we've had over 5 million hits and downloads of these videos. The worldwide interest in creatine is increasing. In fact, if you look at alt metrics over time, we were talking to ourselves in the 90s and 2000s. Now everybody's talking about creatine. And the number of altmetric hits demonstrates that. So what's happening is creatine's gone from more of a supplement for sports and younger individuals now into a health supplement throughout the age. And this is because we're seeing creatine now added to active aging supplements and for general health supplements and aging specific supplements. When talking to people who formulate nutritional supplements in the United States, I made a presentation like this, and they could not believe all the health benefits potentially of creatine supplementation. And so they started adding their creatine into their supplements so that people are more aware of it. We just got a grant with the national U.S. Department of Agriculture to find out more about how much creatine's in food, so we can label, oh, this has 1 gram of creatine per serving, okay? And people will go to the grocery store and say, oh, I can get my creatine. We were at the conference yesterday, and they're talking about yogurt now that's got creatine in it. Fantastic, right? And so I've got my yogurt, I can get some that have different things. I get a gram of creatine, wonderful. So we're now looking at food additives for creatine. This is the change in red of the percent change or increase in creatine sales. It's tripled in a few years, especially after COVID, okay? I'll get to your question in a second. And so what to summarize? There's more than creatine, more about creatine just for performance. If you're an athlete and you're training heavily and you're not taking creatine, I'll beat you every time. We have teams that won national championships because their team was taking creatine and their competitors weren't. Almost every professional team's taking creatine. Almost every large-scale team in the United States is taking creatine, not only for the performance benefits, but also if there's risk for concussion, it reduces their risk and severity. And so if they're an athlete, you got to be taking creatine. What we need to know is it now has applications for pregnancy throughout the lifespan into the elderly. And so there's lots of research looking at the therapeutic benefits of creatine. We recommended everybody get 2 to 3 grams per day of creatine, no matter what, whether it's your diet, functional food, or taking a supplement. Make sure you at least have 2 to 3 grams. Why? All that NHANES data that we showed you on risk and epidemiological associations, typically the minimum was at least 1 to 2 grams per day on top in the diet, on top of what your body's synthesizing. So minimally, you should get about 2 to 3 grams just to make sure. What else? High-risk populations, therapeutic benefit. And if you're doing research in this area, even though we've been doing research for a long time on creatine, we are just at the beginning of understanding how creatine has a lifetime effect. So question is, you got creatine? Are you consuming enough creatine? A lot of times we say, well, I don't know. Are you eating lots of fish and fish and meats? If not, are you taking dietary supplement of creatine every day? Thank you so much. question right here, yes.
How about the creatine supplementation and the increase of creatine?
You said what?
The link between creatine and increase the possible increase in creatine.
Oh, creatine, okay. So the question is, what's the relationship of creatine and to creatinine? So there's a diagram I showed you a minute ago that said that low pH levels protect creatine. Same thing as high pH, it prevents the cycling. So what normally happens is you consume creatine, it's stored as creatine in muscle. And when you break down and use the muscle a lot, you will have a little bit of creatinine broken down naturally. The more muscle mass you have, the more your baseline level of creatinine is typically. In fact, they've used creatinine as an estimate of protein content in the body. When I'm more active, I have more creatinine breakdown. And when I have creatine supplementation, I have a slight increase. If you look at all the papers, though, there's no statistically significant difference. It may go from 1.1 to 1.2. The concern from the physician is if you're training heavily, your creatinine's at 1.4, and usually 1.5 is the cutoff for, oh, there's a problem with my renal. And we showed years ago that that increase is natural in athletes, even if they don't take creatine, and often reflects dehydration in athletes. And when we do more sophisticated renal studies, no effects at all of creatine on any of those. We just got done doing a safety study where you can look up creatine and renal and have every paper published on it pops up for you. And we did the analysis. There's no statistically significant differences between creatine users and non-users in any renal marker in any study, younger, older, in healthy, and even the clinical population study. So there's no effect. We see a slight increase, but it's not a problem. Other questions? Great question. Oh, okay. This question is about, is there a association between using creatine and things like eating disorders and anorexia? No. There is a group out of Harvard that has been talking about this, no data at all. And they're really pushing the political aspect of, well, it's a gateway supplement. So if they'll take creatine, they'll try something else. Or if they take creatine, they're going to try to cut weight too much. There's no study. If anything, creatine improves muscle mass, helps you maybe lose a little body fat if you're training, improves your body image. And so we actually just published a paper, a position stand a few months ago about this specific topic, because there are groups in the United States trying to make it illegal to allow creatine to be sold to minors under 18 years of age without their parent buying it for them. And our position is kids should be consuming creatine in their diet. And I'd rather than buy a energy bar with a little creatine in it than go out to Starbucks and buy a large coffee with lots of sugar and caffeine. And so it's a part of being properly educated, but there's no data at all showing any risk and any association to eating disorders with taking creatine. Usually people who take creatine are more worried about fitness and health and those type of things. But that is a common myth out there. Good question. Yes? Question, is there any long-term side effects for creatine over years? No. All the data so far has been done, and this is up to over 10 years of taking up to 20 to 30 grams a day, have found no negative effects at all. In fact, when you look at the paper we just published, we not only looked at the incidence of side effects reported in all the studies, but we also went on the adverse event monitoring systems throughout the world and looked for creatine. And the reported percentage of creatine in any side effect is 0.0007%. Never mentioned. And all those are mainly due to mixing creatine or having creatine in something else they were taking, and then probably side effects are more related to those things, like an energy drink or something that might lots of caffeine. And so there's no long-term data. Some of these populations with creatine synthesis deficiencies have been studied now for over 30 years. In fact, one of the largest databases on clinical populations went 8 years of 20 grams a day. Our first few studies were 25 grams a day for 12 weeks. So we've not seen any associated side effect, no pulses in the literature, no pulses in any of the adverse event monitoring systems. And as you then take a look at the NIH database, if you don't have much creatine in your diet, you're at greater risk for lots of things, at least from associated epidemiological studies. Yes.
Very interesting talk. And it's the more interest for me is the label of food with the amount of creatine, because I think that for general population especially, there are more indication on the food, and then they can have the extra amount that they need without go to high amount that maybe they can have some discomfort, like, I don't know, maybe intestinal discomfort. How long do you think this new project will take for?
There's questions about food labeling and putting creatine on the food labels. I think that because the public now is becoming aware that they'll drive and encourage manufacturers and food companies and things to start putting it on there. And when they start seeing market advantage by listing how much creatine's in their product, because the consumer's aware, hey, I want to get creatine in my diet, I think you'll see that more often. There is an effort to try to get creatine listed as an essentially, conditionally essential nutrient. And even in things like breast milk or formulas, there's some studies showing you need a little bit in that change population. So I think it's coming. It'll probably take another 5 or 10 years before it's adopted, but you're going to start seeing at the store 1 gram, 0.5 grams, creatine, because people are going to start seeing it's important. Yeah. And we're also seeing more interest in adding creatine to functional foods. And I think that's the next big wave. It won't be necessarily supplements, it'll be energy bars and foods, yogurts, things like that. Yes.
You said whether that it's growth plans in creation of certain other side effects. I want to know if after long term supplementation is begun, is there any possible let's say loss something? Was I read the new because of that like the capacity for short term supplementation on the endogenous synthesis of creatine. So after long term supplementation is there a possibility of it?
So the question is, would long-term creatine supplementation suppress endogenous synthesis to the point it might be deleterious? When you take 20 grams a day of creatine, you do see a temporary reduction in endogenous synthesis because you have plenty in the diet. When you then stop the supplementation, the endogenous synthesis goes back, at least in humans and in animals and human studies that have done. There doesn't seem to be any long-term negative effect of that suppression. Additionally, there's no reason not to continue to take a small amount of creatine to maintain creatine stores. And so none of the studies show any adverse effects, even long-term, of taking creatine. And there are some populations that take 0.1 grams per kg per day all the time. And there are even some athletic populations taking 20 to 30 grams per day for their entire career. We've actually started our studies in the early 1990s. And some of the cohorts that we studied still take high dose creatine for 30 years, and they're really fit and strong and powerful. So there's no evidence of that at all. Now, that creatine safety paper kind of puts the nail in the coffin about adverse effects. Because all the data and all the things show that it's no different than placebo, and the incidence is extremely rare if there's a problem. And even short term, we just presented yesterday at the conference in Milan data showing that all the studies show no timing effect, length of supplementation, or dosage effect of any effect on any side effect ever reported. And so it seems to be safe, even irrespective of dose and length of time. Good question.
To better clarify, do we need a specific timing to get our supplement? And do we need a lower years before?
Okay. So the two questions. One, does timing matter? There are a few studies showing if you have a little creatine in your pre-workout before and then have some after, maybe a little bit of benefit, but most of the scientific experts do not think that timing really matters. The most important thing is you have enough creatine in your diet. With that said, 5 grams of creatine causes a nice spike to get it into your muscle and through the transporters. And so I think once or twice a day to get that spike level higher is probably better than just one a day. In our elderly groups that we're doing research on, it's 5 grams twice a day, morning and night. Why? That's the peak we want to get to saturate. And then the next question is on loading. Do you need to load? I still recommend loading. And the reason is because that's the fastest way to increase muscle and brain creatine content. And so loading is 4 times a day, 5 grams. If you're a little bit larger, you might go 4 times a day and a little bit higher dose of 6 or 8 grams per dose. But that generally will increase the muscle in about a week. If you do a low dose, long-term approach, eventually your muscle will saturate. It takes about 4 to 5 weeks. So if you're an athlete or somebody wanting to see if there's a benefit, why would I spend 6 weeks of training without loading and therefore lose the potential benefit of that extra 6 weeks of training? If you're just looking for general health, doesn't hurt to load, probably don't need to. Okay, so that's kind of the thought. Yes.
Quick one, I didn't know about the non-responders that it looks quite interesting.
Yes.
So that's some more changes.
Okay, so we'll do that in the next. Is there a responder, non-responder? I prefer to say less responsive. Everybody who takes creatine is going to respond to some degree. The people who start with lower creatine in their muscle, like a vegan, where somebody doesn't have much meat and fish in their diet, is going to have a lower starting point. Their gas tank's going to be less. So I can fill it up 40% and get really profound effects. There are some individuals who have a relatively high meat intake, and therefore they are closer to their maximum saturation. And so those who are there may see less performance benefits, but they get all the benefits of having.
So, not adjudicating responsiveness or not?
No. There seems to be in the literature a range of about 160 millimolar per kg dry weight muscle, kind of the upper threshold. Now, with that said, yes, but with that said, we do have athletes that are much higher than that. And we've not seen any genetic predisposition of why they may be able to store more than others. But there seems to be some ceiling, whatever that is for that individual. So if you start higher, you'll have less effect. Only on performance, not on all the other effects.
Thanks for all the information here about that. I learned a lot about it. I thought of another different study that I participated to, where we have seen the effect of different foods, which have been taken by a large sample for many years, about 20 years or more. And at that time, what was found was that, and among the others, there was the foods which are rich in creatine, particular meat. And what was found out was that meat is good for people aged 65 and more because of sarcopenia and so on. Why, in the long run, it is not it may lead to some problems for people between 30 and 65. Now, this was about meat. you say that there's no difference between these two groups of age people?
As far as the effects of creatine,
In the long run.
in the long run, the longer you take creatine and have a higher above normal levels in the diet, seems to be beneficial for longevity and for lots of health indications. As far as meat, though, if you have a high meat diet, you're also bringing a lot of fat and you're bringing other things and calories. So if I consume 2 pounds of meat per day to get my 3 or 4 grams of creatine, that's 1,500 extra calories you may not need. So if you're concerned about cholesterol and too many calories and obesity as we're aging, maybe the supplement might be a little bit more efficient for you to take without all those calories. But as far as the long-term effects, studies are pretty clear that the longer you take creatine, or at least have that 2 to 3 grams extra creatine in the diet, seems to have a lot of profound health benefits. Yes. Oh, and I'll also add with these studies, Dr. Osajic did compared, because we estimate creatine content by meat and fish intake. And so they also have found that the effects of creatine are independent of the total protein intake from the source of meats. And so it seems to be the creatine that's driving it, not just the meat.
So basically, you say creatine has the good of meat down the.
Yes. It's like fats. You got great essential fatty acids, right? Your omega-3s, but you don't need all the other stuff sometimes. So, yes. Yes, great question. Are there pharmaceutical type studies looking at approaches to increase or regulate creatine metabolism in certain disease? Yes. Some of the cancer research, they're looking at specific creatine transporter issues as well as uptake and trying in some cases accentuate that to get the effect on the energy metabolism, reduce the tumor growth, or in some instances actually try to block some of those pathways. So a lot of research was done in the 1980s and 90s on cyclocreatine, and that was the pharmaceutical approach. In fact, a lot of studies in the 70s, they were providing creatine in intravenous formulations for conditions. For example, if you had heart failure, they were adding creatine into the IV and the heart failure was improved and that was much detrimental loss. So in cancer in particular, there's a lot of interest in that. Other questions? Yes, yes, please.
As everybody has.
Dedicated for
Thanks a lot. Right, just put it, something you showed was the correlation between creatine and methylation. And if I well understood that the epigenetic growths are lower in those creatine, am I correct? Or which kind of everything about that?
Well, most of that's coming from the longitudinal epidemiological assessment from Serge Ostajic. And so that's a paper that just came out on the DNA with the mortality paper, kind of 2 separate ones, but same type of thing. And, you know, you can have methylation and non-methylated, and you have basically you're activating or deactivating your gene expression. And there's been a lot of research. We've even done studies on obesity, trying to find ways with diet and exercise to have those methylations be more optimally turned on so that you get more adaptation, which seems that creatine plays a role in some of that as well.
They are expression.
Yes, expression, yeah. And so creatine, there's methyl donors actually with creatine. If you look at creatine to homocysteine and others, that may be a way to scavenge some of those methyl donors and therefore affect the ratio of the expression. A lot of fascinating people, yeah. Yeah, we actually did some studies on obesity where we did a swab on your mouth and looked at certain fat-related expression of certain fat-related genes, and then tried to use exercise and diet to switch those and find out whether people were more responsive to different types of diets by do this switching.
Well, some of the,
Yeah, we did both blood, but mainly from a buccal sample. Yeah, a lot of fascinating capabilities. Other questions? All right, myths. What have you heard about creatine? You've always wanted to know true or false. Yes.
Weight loss. Weight loss.
Oh, so yeah. If you were at our presentation yesterday, that was the topic, the myths, right? And so one is, does creatine cause baldness? No. There's studies that have shown, in fact, one just came out from Scott Forbes's group in Canada, definitively shows no effect on. And in March at the conference, creatine conference, I had to say, does creatine cause baldness? And I had all the pictures of all the creatine researchers who are all bald. It's got to be the creatine. No, it's not the creatine. Other myths back here.
So this is a myth that doesn't have any kind of protein or doesn't give you that kind
Between an animal source or versus creatine. I can tell you that supplemental creatine monohydrate does not have any effect on renal function. Now, if you're eating a pound of meat per day to get your 2 grams of creatine, yeah, that might have some long-term impact. And so that also needs to be, some people are against supplementation. Here's an example where, why would I want to have that many calories to get my creatine when I can have a little scoop that costs 10 cents? It's really not that expensive. And so in this case, it makes sense to get your creatine from supplemental sources. Other myths. Is it for guys only? No. Does it help with women training adaptations? Yes. At our presentation the other day, it was all on the myths. So we went one right after another. I will add, in the European Union, creatine monohydrate is the only source of creatine that's approved by EFSA. And has health claims that have been proven and accepted by EFSA, meaning strength, muscle, performance. They haven't quite approved the cognitive, but they're getting closer to doing that. We have more data with that. The only question I've had about their evaluation is there are some countries, in fact, when creatine first came out in Italy, you were only allowed 3 grams per serving. And that was the limit. And there's no data to show that you only should have 3 grams per serving. In fact, it's more optimal at 5 grams per serving to get the spike in the blood where you need to be. And so people bought it and just took 2 scoops or whatever to get their creatine. So there's no reason to have it less than 3 grams. In some of the studies we did initially were 8 grams per serving, 3 times a day, 25 grams a day. And so other than that, the EFSA is pretty good evaluation of it.
The skill that shows gastrointestinal distress. How do you get
What about creatine GI upset? Almost all papers that show or report some of that, they had the same instance in those who were not taking creatine, were taking the placebos. And so is it the creatine, or is it just the fact that they're taking a supplement that didn't agree with them? Or was something in the placebo that it's no different than taking the placebos? And so we actually looked at the incidence of cramping. That's the one thing, or the cramping of GI upset, that comes up about 5% of all studies report something like that. 5% in the people taking creatine and 5% in people taking placebos. So there's no difference at all. We did present a paper yesterday, that showed in the clinical population studies, these are people with clinical treated conditions, mainly neuromuscular diseases in that database. and elder individuals in that database. And we did see an association with a little bit more reports of GI upset in the clinical population versus those who were healthy. And it may be because of the pathology of some of the conditions they have that may have made them more susceptible. But overall, there is no difference at all in the 685 studies with 16,000 or 12,000 in placebo and 12,000 patients in those taking creatine, no difference at all. Someone said, well, if it bothers you, just take smaller amounts, eat it with food. We didn't even show that dosage has an impact on it. And we have some athletes, like others, that can consume a lot of food and don't bother them. Some have more stomach issues, take as much as tolerated, so. Thank you very much.